Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Alan Rice. Alan is the managing director of Caché Procurement LLC, a boutique provider of procurement and AI advisory services. So, hi, Alan. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So I talked a little bit about your current role in my intro, but what else do you think it's useful for people to know about your professional journey up to this point?
Well, I've been in procurement for over 30 years now. Was lucky enough to be able to practice my profession all over the globe. So I worked in Europe and Asia, all over Latin America, US. So I've gotten a pretty rounded work experience as far as procurement supply chain is concerned. But I always had a knack for the tech piece of it. And I've always interested me. So I've always had that as an area of strength. I would say as far back as when the .com started and, the first e-procurement solutions came out. And I said at that time, wow, because I still remembered what it was like to do an RFP and create a 3-ring binder and send them more binders out to 40 different suppliers. And all of a sudden this e-procurement thing came out. You're going like, OMG, right?
Total game changer.
And so recently, in the last couple of years, with this revolution that's going on with generative AI, I kind of get that same feeling I did 20 years ago, that this is another OMG moment. This is another, seismic shift in how we do our job, but actually impacting a lot more than just our profession.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the experimental use cases have been across the board. And when you and I last connected to talk about this, you had made the comment that although it's new, we shouldn't think about AI as optional, that we should view it as something that we need to understand and even leverage sort of as a matter of survival. Where does that opinion come from?
It's not just my opinion. I mean, it's practically all of the, thought leadership in this space. And you can look at, there are many reports out there from organizations like the IMF to Goldman Sachs to big consulting firms like Accenture, A.T. Kearney. They're all saying the same thing. This is an existential. It is going to change how we do work at all levels. So there were a lot of reports that came out around 18 months ago from a lot of these well-known players, including companies like IBM, that calculated at that time that the newer AI technologies were going to impact anywhere from 30 to 40% of the workforce within the next 3 years. The latest reports that I read have redone those numbers, and it's more like 80%.
Wow.
So what that means is people are going to have to relearn to do their jobs with this new tech, or potentially those jobs will disappear, especially if they're transactional tactical roles.
Yeah.
So they're going to end up having to learn how to do new things. Somebody explained to me one day, I said, if you can kind of think about the revolution back at the turn of the last century that went from horse and buggies to cars, right? All the people that had jobs, whose job it was, for example, to keep the New York City streets clean for horse and buggies to get through, those jobs went away almost overnight. But the flip side is new jobs appeared. Mechanics, gas station attendants. So nobody knows exactly what all those new jobs are going to be that appear. And I think that's the exciting thing now. It happens in procurement as well. I think a lot of the stuff that is kind of mundane in our daily tasks, I don't know anybody that likes to write RFPs. I don't know anybody that likes to launch purchase orders, right? Yeah. If those things were just automated and they could focus on stakeholder engagement, relationship building, supplier engagement, strategy, all the stuff that you're kind of in it for. It's like having done procurement for so many years, people ask me, what's the thing you like the most? I like the negotiating. The time I sit at the table and I've got to negotiate something. Because at that point, it's still that human interaction of a buyer and a seller having a discussion over a service or a goods and trying to reach an agreement, right? I don't like having to cut the purchase order. Those are just necessities.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that you said in your comments about AI, I actually want to focus on for a minute. You talked about newer AI technologies.
Right.
Because AI in and of itself is not new. I mean, it continues to improve, but it's not new. It's really generative AI that is starting to spark new ideas and new creativity. How do you think generative AI specifically is starting to impact procurement?
Well, you're right. I mean, AI has been around. It was coined back in the 50s. So artificial intelligence has been around. And a lot of us who contracted solutions in the supply chain have purchased AI solutions over the years, maybe over the last decade, machine learning solutions, that did what it sounds like. It learns as you use it. But generative AI kind of hit the market, and I want to say the public market, because it's been around for a few years as well, but it hit the market somewhere around December of 22 when OpenAI decided to release ChatGPT, and it was kind of their way of releasing an AI into the wild and letting it learn. It was very smart, right? So generative AIs are based on something called LLMs, large language models. So essentially, it's just a huge model of all kinds of data and information. And these generative AIs are based on neural networks. So they were engineered to think like the human brain. So they can look at all this data and try to come up with the most likely answer to your question. And because it's based on so much data, most of the time their answers are pretty dead on.
Yeah.
And obviously, as the technology progresses, it gets better and better. It makes mistakes, which you've heard in the news as hallucination.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Because it can't, in some cases, distinguish, if you want to call it, fake news from real news. So people are still training it, and it's going to get better and better. But the speed and the evolution of how it gets better is just insane. I mean, anybody that saw the first iteration back 18 months ago or so of ChatGPT and now sees the latest iteration goes, it doesn't seem or feel like the same tool.
Yeah. No, it's come a long way.
And so generative AI is where this revolution is happening, but it's standing on the shoulders of much other tech, like, neural networks and machine learning and deep thinking and all of this that's come up through the years. But that's what's changing our lives right now. That's all these bots. That's why you see them popping up everywhere. Microsoft, Google, you name it. I mean, even WhatsApp has got an AI in there for you to ask questions. And I believe I just saw a demo of the Apple Intelligence that's coming out later this year. It's pretty insane that you'll now be talking to your phone as if you were talking to a personal assistant.
Wow. Now, as exciting as all of that is, change is still hard, right? And I raise my hand on that. I don't like change. Change is not my favorite. So it always requires a little bit of individual as well as collective courage to get these benefits. Yeah. We were talking before about the job changes. If I was somebody that really did take pride in and enjoy taking care of the horses, maybe I don't want to work at a gas station, right? Maybe I don't want to learn to be an auto mechanic. So there's individual adoption, but then there's the business culture that needs to surround that to make sure that companies and teams don't get left behind, so that we're mindful as we progress, but that we progress nonetheless. Any advice that you have around how we can sort of achieve courage at scale professionally?
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about this new tech is it doesn't take much to learn it. And in fact, it's the only tech that teaches you how to use it. Meaning I can go to an AI and ask it to train me how to use it. And I think most of the studies out there say that it takes about 10 hours worth of playing with an AI to get comfortable with it. I mean,
which is not very much.
It's not very much.
Yeah.
Exactly. So most people just need to play with it, right? Because everybody's going to find what usage it fits in their own daily lives. Because it's not just for work. You're going to have to get comfortable with it.
That's
The
right.
kids are going to be using it for school if they're not already. Doesn't matter what level, whether we're talking middle school, you're talking college.
Or whether they're told not to. They're still going to be using it.
They're going to use it one way or another.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, in that particular space, professors and teachers are using it because it streamlines their tedious task of doing things like generating tests and quizzes and reviewing them. So a lot of that stuff will end up getting automated, freeing up teachers and professors' time for their students and not the administrative part of the work. So I think once people start playing with it, they'll find a reason why it solves some of their problems. And it could be something very simple as a home task, right? You go on there, you ask, how do I do this? Because as I explain to people, Google's always been your best friend for years, right?
Yeah.
And you go to Google and you ask it a question. But the only thing Google can do is take you to a website that it thinks the answer is there. Whereas the generative AI tries to give you the answer. Doesn't make you have to scroll through websites. It will if you ask it to.
Sure.
But it'll go straight to the answer. What I'm seeing now is a lot of companies are realizing that their workforce needs to learn it. So they're building it into their training programs. So, recently you could read in the press a lot of newer companies that are talking about all of their new hires are being put through AI 101 training. I think you're going to see that just explode over the coming months and a year because everyone recognizes there's a general basic lack of knowledge of what is it, what can it do. I can tell you a personal story. So I had a friend of mine that he retired recently, and to keep himself busy, he became the president of his HOA. And one day he's telling me that he spends untold hours reading vendor contracts, license briefing and things like that. He's not a contract manager. He's kind of trying to learn all this legal language. And I said, well, why don't you just feed it to an AI and have the AI read it to you, summarize it in layman terms, and then recommend changes? And he goes, I can do that. So I showed him. And one day he goes, I spent 6 hours last week on one contract. And he goes, it took me 5 minutes to do the same thing with another one. He goes, you have no idea how much free time you saved up for me. And I'm actually learning this stuff quicker because the AI explains things I don't understand.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a basic in your own life kind of opportunity to do something. So it's not just students. You're going to find all kinds of reasons why to do it. Amazon released its AI on reviews. It's actually pretty interesting. Now, when you go to the Amazon website, you look at a product, the first review is going to be the AI. It takes the 10,000 other reviews for that product and it summarizes it instead of you having to read through them. And it's actually super useful. And people are getting, coming back with very, very positive feedback on that. So we start to see it in our daily lives. Businesses understand it. They understand it. It's survival for them because everyone's going to do it. Before we lived in a 3 to 5 year tech cycle. Some like to be on the edge and, get the newest tech, implement the newest tech. Others kind of want to be the caboose of the train. They want to wait and let everybody else come into the page before they get on board with it. AI is not going to allow that because of the speed that it's moving. So you're going to have to take calculated risks because your competitors could skyrocket ahead of you at such a speed that you may never catch up. So it's going to be problematic for companies whose culture is very conservative when it comes to that. They stick with tech from decade to decade.
Yeah.
And so that's that's going to be problematic. That's why I believe, and I'm not the only one that believes it, most of these research firms will tell you the same thing. Big, well-known companies could end up going the way of Kodak, which is, right, they just don't get it. They don't see the benefit right away. And by the time they do, they try to catch up, but it's too late. We're going to see it happen.
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned the educational process, right? Yeah. That as part of onboarding, people are being given training. And I'm sure some of that is, what are our policies around the effective use of AI? I'm sure some of it is around being efficient at using the AI. And when it comes to skills in procurement, one of the debates that is ongoing is about the back and forth of, should category expertise reside in-house? Should we just rely on the business for category expertise? Should we go to third-party experts for category expertise? Do you think AI is an area where procurement should have someone sort of designated, or small team of people, depending on the size of the organization, designated as, you're the person that needs to go be creative, explore new uses, but get really, really good? Not the 10-hour entry level to get comfortable, but really, really good to use AI. Or because of that fast improvement cycle you talked about, is this an area where, for now, we should continue to leverage either our IT organization or third-party experts that live and breathe AI all day long? Where, from a dedicated skills standpoint, do you think procurement should be around AI?
Well, I always use the same analogy, right? I don't need to be a mechanic to drive a car, right? I don't need to know how the engine works to know how the car works. Right. So I think AI is going to be the same. You can't get everybody to be an AI engineer.
Yeah.
That's why you have an IT department, and hopefully they staff up and skill up to it. What you need to know is, how can you use that technology to solve for a problem, right? How can it make you more efficient? How can it improve the user experience for some interaction with your business? I think that's where you're going to have to learn. Nobody really, you find a lot of folks that are purchasing a particular product, for example, doesn't mean they're an expert. I purchase a laptop doesn't mean I'm a hardware engineer, right? As we like to say, we know just enough to be dangerous, right? We know the terminology, we know how to buy it. We may not know the difference between a few other components of the laptop. This is going to be the same idea. Right? Yes, there will be people who need to maintain the AI. You just need to know how to use it. So, for the last quite a few years, you always hear procurement supply chain leadership talk about the problem of human capital. They just can't find the people. So when you're talking about categories, a lot of complex categories, you would end up having an individual who's an expert in that category. Say it's marketing. So that individual is a marketing expert, right? So they manage the category, they negotiate all of that, but they really are boxed into that category because they're the expert. And, the reliance on this individual who knows this. AI is going to democratize that a little bit. It's going to allow departments to have category managers who are more generalists and who rely on the AI to be the subject matter expert. But the flip side to that is they'll literally get on-the-job training for categories they've never done before or don't know very well, because the AI does, and it's training you just by the mere fact that you're running through the process.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't know how to source ground freight, but if I run that process through an AI, after one event, I'm probably pretty good at it by that term, because I have an expert there that I can ask at any question. Third parties, bringing them in, you're always going to bring those in for certain things, but a lot of companies are budget restricted. Those things are expensive to bring in third-party advisors and consultants. And you can't do it across the board. So you have to kind of cherry pick which category you're going to do. Yet a procurement organization may manage hundreds of categories.
Absolutely.
To bring in, third parties for maybe a half dozen of them. So that's the limitation. That's why I say AI democratizes a lot of this stuff.
Mm. So we've kind of mapped out, where we are today, right? It's something to be experimented with. It's something to be learned. It's something to be creative about. We know it's going to continue to develop and evolve and become even more sophisticated and hopefully even easier to use, as easy as it is now. As we think about sort of bigger picture here, I think this ties in an interesting way to a pairing of questions that I put to every guest. So given what we've been talking about, I'll be interested to hear your answers. I'm going to give you 2 questions, Alan. You can choose either one, and there are no wrong answers. So your choices are, what does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? Or what do you think heroism looks like in a business context?
I'm going to pick the heroism one because I see that a lot. Heroism is going to be fighting for what you think is, or what you believe is right, regardless of company culture or what you think the bosses are going to approve of or how much budget you think. You have to fight for what's right. So the hero is one that takes calculated risks, but does not have a fear of failure, because we never learn anything from success. We only learn from failure. So if you fear failure, you do not learn. And so that's what I see. I deal with it all the time, basically trying to talk through folks off the ledge. You don't need to fear it. If you're going to fail quickly, right? If you make a decision based on the available data of the moment and it doesn't work out, that's fine. You took a calculated risk. Try to fail quickly, pivot, move on. That's the world we live in now, right? But if you're in a company that has a conservative culture and has been very aggressive towards penalizing individuals that made a mistake, then you're less likely to put your hand on that fire.
Yeah.
So while it's good to look at the past as an indicator of the future, it may not be in this particular case of AI, because you're not allowed past to base yourself on.
No, that's very true. And we're going to have to be willing to fail to some extent, hopefully in a controlled and contained way.
Right.
But we know that this is going to be part of our future. And so the sooner we get on board and start learning more, the better off we're going to be, as you said. Alan, if people are meeting you for the very first time through this conversation, what is the best way for them to reach out and connect with you?
They can find me on LinkedIn if they want. That's fine. People reach out to me all the time through LinkedIn. I do try to respond to everybody. They can send me a message, or they can send me an email there, whatever they like, or they can just reach out to me through my website at Caché Procurement.
Excellent. Well, Alan, thank you so much for being with me to share your perspective on this incredibly important topic.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.